Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu, and I'm back with another Digimon deck profile video. So today I'm going to be taking a look at EX06, and EX6 offers us lots of new and powerful tools in order to build and iterate on some new and existing decks. And today's deck I'm going to be taking a look at is going to be the latest iteration on the Legend Arms deck. So Legend Arms is a pretty interesting deck on how it wants to play. Every time we visited this deck, it kind of is trying to do something different, but still kind of the same. This new version wants Legend Arms to go back to being a single stack deck and utilize the Ace DNA mechanic to be able to DNA Digivolve during the opponent's turn, which makes it way easier than what we were doing with the starter deck on trying to play two high-level bodies and DNA that way. This new Ragnaloardmon has some great protections, allowing us to actually be able to keep him around a little bit more efficiently compared to some of his other iterations, so he can be pretty threatening at times when our stack is lined up correctly, on top of the fact that the deck just has lots of new tech and tools that we're going to be able to work with and customize, because Legend Arms just is working with a lot of various different abilities, and we even have effects that are going to be adding Digimon directly from our hand into our inheritable sources to make our Digimon instantaneously stronger when we are able to use that ability. And we even have abilities that trigger when we're going to be putting cards in and potentially taking cards out. Then when it comes to the deck's overall weaknesses, it isn't necessarily the perfect deck because it's still a stack-based deck at the end of the day, which comes with its own natural inconsistencies on finding the correct part at the correct time. And this deck being a really weird deck because every single time that we've revisited it, it's trying to do something different, so the new parts and pieces don't necessarily mesh and meld very well with some of the old pieces, really limiting the pool of cards that we actually have access to, even though it's all in the same archetype. So the majority of this deck, as an example, is just going to be EX6 cards. And the deck, unfortunately, doesn't have the best of abilities to actually shore up its consistency issue because it doesn't have access to cards like Memory Boost and the training cards, because all of the Digimon are monocolor instead of true two-color, so that way we don't actually have the ability to efficiently use those tools to be on par with some of the other meta decks. And the Ragnaloardmon himself, while he does have some good protections and has some really impactful turns when we use him, he doesn't actually have the ability to keep the pressure up as well as some other decks do, which gives the opponent actually time to be able to respond to the threat, on top of the fact that against specific matchups, the deck is actually going to have a really hard time with, just because they can get around what your mechanics are trying to do and how the deck is trying to function, even though we do have the flexibility to be able to try to rebuild what was potentially lost, which makes it overall a pretty fun and interesting deck to play around with, especially since the majority of the cards are from EX6. You really don't need that much outside resources to invest in order to make this a cohesive and strong deck. So with all that said and done, let's just dive right into the deck profile and see what we're working with. Starting off with the Digitamas, I am going to be running a black base, so I'm going to be playing 4 copies of Kakinmon because he's the black Digitama. Sakudamon and Kakinmon are trying to do some very similar things on being able to gain us some memory. Kakinmon is actually gaining some memory when we're taking out a Legend Arms from our inheritable source, which he himself is doing, which is really good at being able to have extra flexibility on how we could use that memory and how we could reuse our cards, versus Sakudamon forcing us to put the cards into our inheritables to be able to gain that memory. And because I'm running Kakinmon, that's forcing the direction to be a little bit more black-based primarily. So as a result, we could see that in the rookies of choice that I'm going to be using and the ratios. So I'm going to be running 4 copies of Ludamon from BT3. So this is going to be the deck's dedicated digging and searching tool, looking at the top 5 for our Ragnaloardmon named Digimon, and a Legend Arms type card from among them, which is just a pretty decent searcher, allowing us to potentially grab 2 cards, which is really good to shore up some of that consistency issues. but I'm going to be running Spadamon, Ludamon, and Zubamon because they're all doing relatively similar things on being able to use their ability to put them from our hand to the bottom of one of our Legend Arms traded Digimon or a Digimon of the same level to be able to gain some sort of benefit. We do have to pay memory for this, but again, because of our egg, we can kind of subsidize that a little bit. So Ludamon is going to allow us to give our Digimon plus 2000 DP until the end of the opponent's turn. Zubamon is giving our Digimon plus 4000 DP for the turn to make our Digimon that much more aggressive, and Spadamon is going to be the draw engine, allowing us to draw a card. Spadamon also has a native on-play ability where he allows us to discard a card to draw 2, which is pretty good. Even though the card we have to discard is a Legend Arms traded card, it again is just trying to help the deck be more consistent, while Zubamon and Ludamon are going to be drawing a card when a card is adding into our inheritable sources, which is ideally replacing the card that we're losing. Then, when it comes to the inheritable abilities, Ludamon is just a simple plus 2000 during the opponent's turn, Zubamon is a simple plus 2000 during our turn, and Spadamon is just a rookie sniper, or a low DP Digimon sniper. Then, when it comes to the level 4s, I'm still primarily going to be running EX6 cards. So I'm going to be running 4 copies of EX6 Zuba Eggermon. The idea is to just use the hand ability to pay a cost, tuck them underneath, and it's the same ability that we just saw with our Zubamon, so it's just more added potential power. Then his ability, when we're actually using him, allows us to have our Digimon gain the raid and piercing ability for the turn, so that way we can make even more aggressive plays, especially since we know we have lots of ways to boost our Digimon. And the inheritable is also the same for just that simple plus 2000 DP. Then Ludamon is again going to be taking a lot of same notes as the Ludamon in terms of its ability that's going to be triggering from our hand, and it's also going to allow us to, when we're putting cards underneath this card, gain the blocker and reboot ability for potential defensive lines of play, with that inheritable still being the same. And then the last level 4 of the deck, I'm just going to be running 1 copy of Ludamon from the starter deck. It's not the greatest card, but it's still a decent card nonetheless, and you could run the old BT3 Ludamon if you really wanted to instead, but at least this card still kind of has the ability to throw itself underneath with its on-play ability, and it has a nice inheritable ability to be able to give our Digimon the blocker ability. Then when it comes to the level 5s, again, I'm mostly going to be focusing on utilizing Raiji Ludamon. His ability is, again, all of the same things we've kind of been seeing before when it comes to putting cards underneath our Digimon. So he's going to, again, gain blocker and reboot until the end of the opponent's turn for some defensive lines of play. And Duramon is, again, going to be doing that similar line of thing where it's going to be using raid and piercing. Then the hand ability is going to give our Digimon security attack +1, which is pretty good at trying to pressure the opponent and deal damage. And Raiji Ludamon's ability is allowing us to goad the opponent's Digimon, which is really powerful at being able to force the opponent to attack to trigger our Ace ability. Then the inheritables are pretty decent, and this is where things are getting a little bit more unique, where Raiji Ludamon is offering more protection, and Duramon is offering the ability to trash the top card of the opponent's security when the attack target is switched, which is either when we're going to be raiding into the opponent's Digimon, or if they're going to be choosing to block or not. Then when it comes to the level 6s, I'm actually going to be prioritizing to want to use the starter deck of Braiwi as the main level 6 Digimon, because he doesn't have an ability that triggers from our hand to throw a Digimon underneath. But Braiwi from the starter deck is just one of the stronger cards from the starter deck, because during your turn once per turn, when an effect places a Digivolution source under this Digimon, which we have plenty of ways to trigger, then your opponent's effects can't delete this Digimon or return it to our hand or deck, having some really good ways to protect our Digimon and keep it around, especially since we have multiple ways to be able to trigger this ability. Then he even has a nice when digivolving ability to reveal the top 3 cards and play out a Digimon with Legend Arms in its traits that has a play cost of 7 or less for free, so he can help set up a secondary Digimon, which is how the old Ragnaloardmon from the starter deck wanted to work to, well, get that second body out to DNA with. Then it has a really good inheritable ability where it's going to be adding even more protection to our Ragnaloardmon, so that way it makes him unaffected by the opponent's Digimon's effects. And we're going to be taking some similar notes on wanting to use Ragnaloardmon for more protection, because his inheritable ability is giving our Digimon blocker, and it also is allowing our Digimon, if it's Ragnaloardmon, to prevent it from leaving the battle area other than by deletion effects. So we could try to stack a whole bunch of protections to make it really hard for the opponent to deal with our Ragnaloardmon. Then Ragnaloardmon from EX06 has the nice ability to trigger from our hand, where we get to pay 3 and put him underneath a level 6 or a Legend Arms traded card to de-digivolve all of the opponents with as much DP or less than this Digimon, which we have plenty of ways to boost, so it's not like that's going to be very hard to try to anti-tempo the opponent. But if we're actually utilizing this Ragnaloardmon, it does come with the blocker and reboot abilities native to him, on top of a when digivolving ability to make it so that until the end of the opponent's turn, one of your Digimon isn't affected by the opponent's Digimon effects. So that way it's kind of trying to be the same thing as what the starter deck Ragnaloardmon is doing, just more thematic for how this new style of play is, well, panning out. Then the last level 6 of the deck is going to be the new Durandamon. So this new Durandamon is, well, again, the offensive line, so he naturally comes with Raid and Piercing. He's going to be able to, when we put him underneath, delete a Digimon with as much or less DP as this Digimon for some good cheap removal. And when we digivolve up into him, we can attack one of the opponent's Digimon, which is pretty decent at trying to control the field. Then the inheritables that we're trying to shove underneath our Digimon is Piercing, so it can deal damage consistently, especially if we're going to be attacking into their Digimon, and the ability to not activate security effects when our Ragnaloardmon is attacking their security and dealing damage, which again is just making him that much safer to attack with. Then when it comes to the level 7s, you could kind of play around with how you want the level 7s to be and your ratios for them, but this is just what I settled with because I really do like the new Ragnaloardmon Ace, but I also still like the BT3 version of Ragnaloardmon. So the BT3 version of Ragnaloardmon does have a little bit more pressure potential than the Ragnaloardmon Ace, because he naturally comes with security attack +1, and we can digivolve him for free during our turn by placing a Durandamon or a Ragnaloardmon from our hand to the top of his Digivolution source. But the new Ragnaloardmon Ace is still nothing to sneeze at either, because we can DNA if we have the 2 bodies off of a red level 6 or a black level 6, or we could use the hand counter blasted DNA Digivolution, utilizing specifically Durandamon and Ragnaloardmon. So if we just have one on our field, then we could shove the other one from our hand underneath it to DNA into this card, which allows us to be that single stack deck and still have this power potential. Then he comes with Raid and Reboot, again for more control, and Reboot is still good defensively, and he even has a nice on-play and when digivolving ability, so he has some extra flexibility that the BT3 doesn't have, where we get to trash the top card of the opponent's security stack, and this Digimon isn't affected by the opponent's effects until the end of their turn, so he has complete immunity for the turn we use him. And then if we DNA'd, we also get a de-digivolve 1 on all of the opponent's Digimon and delete one of their Digimon for just some extra control. And then when it comes to the Tamers, I kind of didn't have a whole lot of space for Tamers, but that doesn't mean that there isn't some. So these are just some of the better Tamers that I wanted to highlight if you wanted to play any Tamers, because they're pretty good on helping the deck either be offensive, defensive, or just add some extra consistency. But when it comes to the options, I'm only going to be running 4 copies of Mythical Arms of Salvation. So we could use this card ignoring its color requirements as long as we have a Legend Arms traded Digimon on our field, which we should if we're using this. Then we get to place a Legend Arms traded Digimon from our trash to the bottom of our Digimon's Digivolution source. Then this card goes into the battle area, so we actually have a way to reuse some of the cards even if they end up in our trash. Then its Altern's ability states that when one of your Digimon would leave the battle area other than by one of your effects, we get to trigger the delay ability to place a Legend Arms traded card from the Digivolution source onto our field for free, and then it has a security ability to activate its main, so we could even try to use some of our abilities during the opponent's turn. But that's pretty much it for the deck. It is a really interesting deck, and there is a ton of different flexibility on how you could approach the deck depending on what your core focus is. If you want to try to focus more on the starter deck line, or if you want to try to focus more on the EX6 line, because we do have that flexibility available to us on how we could approach the deck. You just have to understand how your cards are going to be trying to interact with each other and build accordingly. And we do have other useful tech and tools that we could think about utilizing to try to figure out how we could best build this deck, whether you were utilizing some of the new tools or the old tools, or just some generic tools, all depending on the effects you're trying to play, what cards you have access to, and the expected meta you're trying to play against or into. And then when it comes to some potential future upgrades, we really don't know if this deck is going to get any more direct support, but we do know that we're getting some indirect support in the form of a new option to try to help shore up the consistency issues that the deck has. So it's not like this deck isn't a dead in the water deck. It is supposedly getting a little something to help give it a boost on top of any generic red or black tools that we could think about incorporating.